Well, in this very last lesson, I want to talk about three things. I've been thinking a lot about the students in the Los Angeles School District. If you're watching this and you're from a different school district, I still think you'll find this lesson to be extremely helpful. In Los Angeles, as many people in the United States know, we have a diverse melting pot of different cultures, races, nationalities, and backgrounds. And it's really worth our consideration to think about the particular set of students in our own class. So the 3 points I want to talk about is, number one, I want to talk about thinking about how our students think. That's number one. There's actually a term for this. It's called metacognition. It's thinking about how people think. And you can do this with yourself, actually. You think about how you take in information, how you receive educational material. And giving some thought to this is very important. I'll talk a little bit about this. 2 is I'd like to talk a little bit about considering the different background of our students and trying to understand their entire ecosystem. Not just understanding who they are, how they behave in our class, but understanding their entire ecosystem, which means their family, their mom and dad, the language that they're comfortable with, the beliefs and values of that particular language, how their culture has been cultivated over the past centuries, and what are the influences on them that cause them to behave in particular ways and think in particular ways that affect their learning. And then the last thing I'd like to talk about is just this matter of collaborating among other teachers and giving you the opportunity to ask me for more resources and for more opportunities even for teachers to get together and talk about these 3 points. So the first thing is talking about metacognition. How do students learn? And there's a gentleman, he's an author, I'd like to just present him to you. His name is Dr. Martin Seligman. You can do a wiki search on him. And he basically has studied the field of what's growingly becoming what's called, it's actually been around for a little bit, positive psychology. And he actually wrote a book called The Optimistic Child, which really is it's a masterpiece in understanding how to deconstruct the pessimistic mentality that many students have about themselves, and helping them become optimistic and take on a perspective of being able to remove learning barriers. It's outstanding. And I won't get too much into him, but I would really encourage you to read that book, The Optimistic Child. He gives, several points of how a child who may have experienced difficulty in their home life possibly could become pessimistic. He uses this term, learned helplessness, in his prior studies. I believe he's from the University of Pennsylvania. And learned helplessness was something that he learned that among his patients who were depressed, they often, because of a prior situation they experienced that they couldn't change, that they eventually took on a mode of thinking that really tried to accommodate their situation with the perspective that they had no control over the outcome. And so as a result, sometimes students get in this mode, whether because of home life, their personal life, their own situation, they've experienced things and they have a kind of a mindset about what they can gain in the classroom, about what their future will be, and some of them feel like they don't have much say over their future outcome. We have to change that. And this book helps. Let me just give you a few points it mentions. One is the thought of decatastrophizing. That is, when something happens to you, sometimes what happens is you get into this mode where all of a sudden you say, you know what, I'll never be able to get an A in this class. Let's say a student gets an F. They say, I'll never be able to get an A. Well, there's a process that you can take them through that helps them decatastrophize that situation. First of all, the word never is a word that is blowing up the situation much more than it needs to be. So you help them become very specific on what just happened. Yes, you got an F, but it was only on one paper. It was only on one subject. And it was because maybe you watched too much TV. And so don't say never, because you can modify your situation. Let's think about the worst that can happen. Let's think about the best that can happen. And let's think about what realistically will happen. Okay, the worst that will happen is, yes, you'll never get an A, you'll never get a job, you'll never be able to rent an apartment or buy a house, and your life will be a bum on the streets of Los Angeles. Okay, that's the worst that can happen. That's because you never did anything else with your life. From this point forward, you walk out and you live as a bum. Okay, what's the best that can happen? The best that could happen is you go home and you study, and over the next 5 weeks, you start to learn something. And eventually you choose a career that you like. You find a spouse that you love, and a job that you like, and you build a home for yourself, and you have lovely kids. That's the best. Okay, what's realistic that will probably happen? Well, maybe realistic is you'll be depressed for today. You'll go home and you'll say, I hate school. And you won't be thinking about the future. But you know what? You'll say, I'm going to pick up a pen and I'm going to just write down why I did poorly. Okay, your mind begins to focus on actionable items. And you can actually help students methodically come out of their sense of learned helplessness, where they feel like they have no outcome, no control over the outcome of things, where they can change their environment. Actually, even we have teachers, as teachers sometimes get into learned helplessness. The standards, the 21st century technology skills, the classroom I'm in, the students I'm in, I'm just trapped in this situation. But actually, we can modify our own situation, and there's actually a methodical way to do that. But it starts with the way we think. Okay, so that's the first point. Number one is help your students who are struggling with their perception of themselves learn methodical ways to put their attention on actionable items and to decatastrophize, to not use the word never, to not use the word I can't, but to say, you know what, I can do a little bit at 5:30 tonight while sitting on my desk. Help them get really specific. Well, what desk? The desk in my bedroom. Great. So there's a whole study on this that if you think it's worth, even creating a lesson for this, a salary point lesson, go ahead and send me an email. Second point, studying the cultures, the backgrounds of our students. I've been really studying the Spanish-speaking culture. It's the whole ecosystem has to be understood. You have to realize some of these students, a lot of you already know this, they have families that have migrated to Los Angeles. Some are working 2 jobs. We know the parent involvement is critical, but for many of the parents, they just don't have the time. And so what does it look like to sympathize with that situation and to partner with the child? Well, I've been learning the language. Yo puedo hablar español un poco porque yo tengo una maestra en Guatemala. Cada semana yo estoy aprendiendo español un poco con esta maestra en Guatemala por la computadora, por Skype. Okay, so you're thinking to yourself, I don't know what he's talking about. Of course, some of you teachers are probably, who know Spanish fluently, are saying, your accent's wrong. What did I just say? I just said, for 1 hour a week, I'm learning Spanish on Skype, on a computer, with a teacher in Guatemala. So, and I'm learning so much about the Spanish culture. In Los Angeles, they dominate the service market, whether it's restaurants, hotels, gardening, construction. Their value to the community is huge. And I was talking to one person at my work who spoke Spanish, and it was nighttime, and she was actually taking the trash out of my office, and she told me her secret. She said the secret of we who have been in a different country and we come and labor in Los Angeles is that there is no task that is beneath us. We can do anything. You know what? I wasn't raised that way. I wasn't raised with the thought that if there's a task at hand, I can do it. You know what? This particular, she's actually a mother of several kids. She has this attitude. I mean, there she was. I was in an office with a computer, and she was picking up the trash, and she was happy. I wanted to replace her. You sit at the computer. You're smarter than me. You have so much more outlook of life and joy and happiness than I do. Let me do the trash. Anyway, we learn from one another. And to really consider how some of these Spanish students, they're facing situations economically and financially that are challenged, and to realize learning a little bit of their language, learning a little bit of their culture, and understanding that it's not a bad thing that their parents are so busy and are working and can't help them, because their parents are giving them the perspective that they want them to go to school and get a better life. And so I'm struggling with all this. What about the Korean culture? You probably saw Rafe Esquith's TED Talk. Did you notice the Koreans in there? The drummer. What is it about the Korean culture? How does a Korean boy relate to his dad? What's the relationship there? There's something called the Power Index, where they study the relationship of people to their elders. And I don't know if you know this, but Korea has one of the highest power indexes. That means the level of respect that a child should give to an adult is very high. And being able to challenge an adult's viewpoint is something that's not looked good upon. Think about that a little bit. Is that good? Is that bad? These may be touchy areas, but in some situations, it's not good. And if you read, what's the gentleman's name? Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, he talks about how there have been airplane crashes because the pilot was so deferential and so obedient to the senior pilot that he didn't want to let them know that they were about to crash into a mountain. Okay, in that particular situation, there needs to be a little bit of adjustment. But there's other situations where it's very good. Well, these particular nuances of the culture are incredibly important in helping to reach our students. What about the African American culture? Hey, I'm black. I'm African American. There are some internal subjective orientations that I have about myself and about my culture and about how I'm perceived that really affect my learning. It really affects my learning. If it hadn't have been for a mom that, despite a health situation that I had and despite difficulties in my upbringing, but who really gave me the perspective that you can study hard. That's basically what she gave me. You can study hard. I probably wouldn't be here today building my own company with a passion to somehow help our children in Los Angeles become globally competitive through the valuable channel of teachers in the classroom. I contribute that to my mom. And so understanding these little things. What about the Hebrews, the Jews? How honorable the Jews are, and their life, their living, their perspective, their values, just honorable. I work with a gentleman at Rand Corporation, and he and I we both pray in the morning. We pray. You know, I'm a Christian, he's Jewish, and we have both honoring God. We respect each other so much. So anyway, I'm saying this because we have to add an element into our education that begins to think about the background of our children. And when you begin to understand the nuances of the culture, you know, I could spend an entire salary point class on this. You really begin to open a door, and especially when you form the students into teams, it's helpful. The last thing I would really like to say is that we as teachers, we have to get together and talk about these things. We have to bring out all the topics that seem like they're taboo, and we need to struggle together, talk together of how to get breakthrough moments. You know, in industry they call them moments of truth. They're these moments where all of a sudden an impact is made on a student because you touch something of their life. Anyway, you're going to read one more lesson on lesson plan writing. I want to just conclude by saying, if this course has been a help to you, or if there's anything in this course that you have not liked, I want to hear from you. And if there are other salary point topic classes that you would like, then email me, and we together can basically change the lives for the better of hundreds of thousands of students that will be our next generation and future in America. Thanks so much for taking this class.